Hello again. I am wanting to spend a little bit more time. This is section 2. This is part 2 of what we were going to talk about today. I want to spend a little bit of time on what makes an intervention a best practice intervention for you to use in these papers. I realize that the book tells a lot about, in each section, what is the research behind it, but I want to spend just a few minutes here so we're kind of grounded in that. Since what you're going to be doing in the paper is describing interventions and choosing. And from all the host of interventions that are listed in that book, you can choose what you think is best. So let's talk about what we're going for with this population. And again, like I said 100 times, for this population with severe mental illness, here's the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. So I know it sounds kind of medical model or clinical, but the reality is we're looking for certain things to decrease. And this is in your book, if you have open the page 27. Some of this is right there in your book. That's why I had you bring that out and take a look at that. So talks about, for this, what your goals for your client, you as a clinician, things like decreasing symptoms, decreasing acute symptoms, having less acute episodes. We're not really talking about a cure necessarily, but we are talking about having a decrease in the amount of episodes, a decrease in the kind of symptoms that would disrupt someone's life and impair them. So you can measure things like how many hospitalizations, a decrease in homelessness, a decrease in people going to jail. All those, even though they sound sort of negative, they're all valid things. And honestly, if you talk with the client about, you're sitting down having a conversation with them about what are their goals, these sometimes might be some of the first things they say. If they've been a person who's been in some trouble, if they've gotten in jail or they're homeless, we might think insight's a good thing for them, but you know what? Look at Maslow's needs. They may say, I just need to be in a decent place, or I want to stop ending up in jail. Why can't what you can help me with is keep the cops from arresting me all the time. It's a valid goal. No client wants to end up in a hospital. So if you're starting out a conversation with clients about, what can this treatment help you with, that's totally honest to talk about. No client wants to end up back in jail and back in a hospital. So if you're helping them decrease those symptoms, that's a great thing. But there's also plenty of things that are goals for increasing periods of stability. Sometimes we just map it out with a client that I look over time with them and say, look, you haven't been in the hospital for 6 months. That's great. You heard young Andrew say that. It's like, I haven't had symptoms in this amount of time. That's okay. They can feel proud of that. Other things that you want to increase maybe are employment, finding a job, having stable housing. That's a positive thing you can work towards. Maybe somebody's living in an awful place, or they're living in a nice place, but it happens to be with their mother, and they don't really want to live with their family. They want to feel independent. Their goal is to feel like an adult person. So a very positive goal is to sort of upgrade their housing to help them move into better housing, where there's maybe a better neighborhood, or living alone instead of with a bunch of roommates that are getting them in trouble, or with their mom. So also things like relationships and quality of life. Remember from the consumer empowerment movement, what I heard loud and clearly from some of those folks is really what they want is a life worth living. Quality in their lives. Same things we all want. Relationships, a nice place to live, fun things to do, things that make you feel good about yourself. Respect. I've gone a long way with clients in forming a goal with them on that we can both agree on, because that's important. As you look to make a goal with a client, think about, is this my goal or is this the client's goal? And the secret is to come to a meeting of the minds of something that both of you can agree on. And it usually is a quality of life situation. Things like for a client who's been in and out of jail and is living with his family and feels ashamed of that and is tired of being, someone yelling at them about it. They don't need you as the care coordinator yelling at them, but maybe your goal with them is to show their family that they can be proud of them. Respect is a great goal. A feeling of achievement, something to do during the day that makes you feel good about yourself. Those are the kind of goals that your clients may actually come up with as you sit and talk with them longer and you find something that you can both get behind. So that's a nice way to think of it. Try and pick a goal that both you and the client can genuinely get behind. Because they can feel it when you're just saying, yeah, you want a job, but I'll put that on the paper, but I don't believe it. Maybe they want a job, but you say you can maybe come to some approximation of that. So the key to this goals is a mutually agreed upon goal, but also successive approximations. Figuring out ways to get part way there in something you can both agree on. Somebody might not need to be a brain scientist next week, but getting in a routine and a schedule to work, that's a great step towards their goal of getting back to work. Even things like driver's license. What are you going to do when the first thing the client says, I want my driver's license back? You don't have to go to, well, you can't really. Actually, there's ways to do that. There's ways to help a client do that. You can say, let's look at what it takes. You could take them to go look at the rules and the rule book, whether or not they have the money to take the tests, whether they can take the tests. A lot of times it takes convincing their psychiatrist to sign the paper that they can get their driver's license back. And you as the clinician can join with them and bond with them and say, that's a great goal. How are we going to get the psychiatrist to trust you enough to sign the paper? Then you got some work to do. Then it's like, oh, okay. That leads into, we're going to learn about your symptoms. You're going to show the psychiatrist that you've managed them. Let's work on that. Let's write it out. Let's practice that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of room in these goals to come up with something that the client wants, but that you can totally get behind and helps them move forward. So that's why I'm saying this is a narrative. It's not a list and a check-off list. That's not the way it works with these clients. But the more you engage with the client in their own goals that are these, and I say benefit from counseling. Once a client's more stable psychiatrically, they can benefit from counseling. I mean, you saw that with James. You could counsel him now that he's stable, and you could talk about his family, childhood if you wanted, but not until these pieces are under a better control. So that's the way to engage a client, is to start with what they want, and you have to take a step back and figure out, how can I make this a goal that we both can get behind on? And you know what? Then you've accomplished the thing that is the most important with these clients, and that's a therapeutic relationship. Everything rests on your therapeutic relationship. So helping a client to some of these things that maybe even you have to be convinced of, like really moving out of your family's home, you might need to be convinced of that. But boy, by helping a client do that, you build a relationship and trust, and that's everything. These are adults. Remember that for some of you folks who are working with children. Your client's 18. They can walk. And they do. So unless you have something that you're building together with them, they will walk. They'll walk away. And if the client, like I say, if you try an intervention and it doesn't work, take a step back and think, what did I not see here about my client's engagement or my client's skills or the supports that they need? So that's that piece. So let me take another look at, have you take another look at page 27, yeah, this is my high-tech, stuff here. Page 27 of evidence-based practices. So I want you to take a look at that again before you do the paper. to remember that this paper needs to show at least best practices for this population, but better yet, that's why I actually put it in the evaluation section, so that it cues you to take a back look and say, where could I have used an evidence-based practice and gotten better results, and showed Louise that I know what I'm talking about here, and showed her I read that chapter in the book. These evidence-based practices are what work best with this population. So I'm just going to go over these pretty quickly. And remember, there's best practices for other populations that you may in your head want to apply, but don't do it. So if you tell me my intervention was dream therapy, I'm going to say, no, not for these folks. Do that in your private practice, but you really can't. Unless you can convince me by the evidence in the book. I've had some people in the paper say, this person should be in the state hospital. And say, I don't believe in any of this. These people should be locked up. And I said, well, that's fine. You convince me by what you read in the book that that's best practice, and then it's going to be okay. But it's pretty hard to convince me of that. Although they did start to try and do that by going through the 5150 criteria and hospitalizing the client in the paper, and sort of starting over, which is what you can often do with a client that there's a mistake with, is like start over, hospitalize them, start over. So, but then they changed their mind and said, they couldn't even convince themselves that that was best practice. Or for the first one. So I want to make sure we cover that, because it's hard to reconcile some of these. For this population, the first best practice, and I have these in a little bit different order than your book does. Sorry about that. The first one is effective medication management. So the jury's in, the statistics are in, the research is in. Psychotropic medications work to alleviate those symptoms. They do. Not perfectly, not for everyone, and it's trial and error, and it's fraught with problems, with side effects. You know that now. But the truth is, it's still best practice, evidence-based practice. There's been a ton of research on this. And the interesting piece is the best, and the book says this, is that the best outcomes are with effective medications plus the appropriate supports. And those supports can be your individual counseling. So it's not all medications, but you'd have to really convince me that this client is never going to need medications, because if they never need medications, we're not probably talking about a person with schizophrenia. So for this purpose, we're talking about personal schizophrenia. The second one is illness management and recovery, and that's on page 95. I know, kind of a weird term, isn't it? Illness management. But all that means is that to validate the fact that this is an illness, this is a biological situation that these clients have to deal with every day. So strategies to help that individual manage that is all this is, illness management and recovery. So that can be as simple as you and the client one-to-one, which is the majority of what this is. Talking it through. What were your regular symptoms? What were your initial symptoms? What are the warning signs? Let's map it out. And I've done this 100 times with clients. You just map it out with them over time in a bunch of sessions when they feel comfortable. Or after a hospitalization, boy, then you say, let's start and look at how did it lead to that? What was the first indicator? And you help a client write out what were the triggers, what were the first indicators, so that next time they can have somebody intervene. So as you saw, a really nice way to do that was the RAP program. So using this book individually with a client is one way you can show an illness management strategy. Sorting through, what's my crisis plan? How am I going to manage this? So that's one way. That's just one way. That's often held in a group. That's fine as long as you have the rationale for why a group versus individual. There's other ways, and if you look on the SAMHSA site and you look at other sites, there's plenty of other illness management and recovery strategies. There's UCLA models that are modules that are specifically meant for that. And you can use any of those that you think would sort of fit with what kind of care coordinator you are, what kind of counselor you are, and what works best with the client. Really, if you're talking about pretty sensitive issues like symptoms, I just find one-to-one seems to be, sometimes these clients can go a real long time without anyone asking them, which is sort of hard to reconcile as a clinician. Is sometimes you'll get a client and you'll start asking them these questions. Well, let's just make a roadmap of this. And it turns out nobody in a year or 2 years or a decade has hardly asked them about this. So, you can see why they feel very alone, and they also feel like, can I trust this person? And if I say I have this symptom, are you just going to tell me to go to the doctor? Because that's another piece. If you're helping them, you know that they need effective medications. So in your paper, one of your interventions might genuinely be when the client says, I hate my medications, I hate my psychiatrist. Help them with that. Plenty you can do with that. You can coach them. You can have them sort it out and write it out with you before they go into the psychiatrist. You can have them role play. Better yet, you can go with them. Not to go in with them necessarily to talk for them. If the client wants you to do that, you could do that. Maybe 6 months into it, after the client gets more comfortable, they'll be talking for themselves and they'll be proud of it. That's a piece I love on Andrew. He's proud of the fact that he can say what these symptoms were and that he knows his illness management and recovery strategies. So that's how you intervene on those. So I want to make sure that you know that you may not want to spend as much time on specific medications. You don't have to in this paper, but just don't not address it. So sometimes people just kind of leave it out. They say it was not my scope of practice. You can't really do that as a care coordinator. It is part of what you have to do to be the bridge and to understand why your client is having troubles. So just be sure you address it, and then over time address it. Sometimes people's symptoms go up, they go down. You have different strategies for when people are doing well than when they're acutely psychotic. Look at Ellen Sachs. Even she had a great strategy. I love it that she said that she was not always the best one to notice, and that when she's way down the line, remember the counselor asked her, what do you look like when you're really psychotic? And she says, I look disheveled and angry, and I'm afraid of everyone, and you wouldn't want to be by me. So she specifically found a loved one that she trusts and said, there's times when she can't pull herself back from it, even her, who's got all these degrees and is so articulate. She knows that she can't always pull herself back from it, and she needs an outside view that she trusts. So developing that kind of a plan is hugely beneficial. And it's sort of, what you do in hospitals these days is you develop a plan and a strategy. You think about it ahead of time. Do you want an intubator? Do you want medications? Do you want to be resuscitated? We do all that with our elderly family members. You talk it through. So it's the same thing. You talk it through and you say, do you want to be hospitalized if you get like that? No, she was begging, don't hospitalize me. Okay, she's a person with a lot of pride who does not. Fine. Then you do everything you can to not do that. Some people find comfort in a hospital. Some of you were asking a little bit about James and how compliant he was, in a way too compliant, because he took these medications and he just did what these psychiatrists told him. But he told me he always found that being hospitalized, even if it was against his will, comforting. He knew those people at the psychiatric health facility. He knew they cared about him. He found being hospitalized comforting. He could let his guard down, not be perfect. And believe me, he was very, very psychotic. He knew he needed to be in a safe place. So he felt safe in the hospital. Each client is different, and so that's the whole point of talking with your client about what's the best way for them. The third evidence-based practices that the statistics that come out is assertive case management. So I see from the book that there's different levels of that. You can say exactly the model as it's described, or there's sort of an intensive case management that's not completely the model. So go ahead and alter that the way you'd like. The point is, though, the reason this works so well with these clients is the piece that it's in vivo and community, and that it's 24/7. So the best practice for these clients is support services that come to them, that find them in their home before they're hospitalized, that teach them in their home, that help them with their medications in their own house. Give them rides to the pharmacy, help them walk the 6-foot, space line now. It's stressful for me to go to a pharmacy. Can you imagine these clients getting, all of a sudden they've got to wear masks and walking, 6 feet. So side by side, that's what in vivo means, where the client does it. So every practice that you do with these kind of clients, side by side, tons of support, always meeting them where they are. Now, the place that this doesn't maybe fit is with a different group of clients. People say, well, if this works so well for these clients, why don't we do it for all clients? There's some client populations that this doesn't work for. Borderline personality disorder, for instance. This is not a good technique because it's so supportive, and it's not teaching the person the skills to manage the pieces that a borderline personality disorder needs to manage. It's way too intrusive and just heats them up. So this is contraindicated for someone with borderline personality disorder. And borderline personality, there is good treatment for it. DBT works great for someone, and thank God that they found an evidence-based practice, or at least a promising practice, for that population. So do you use DBT with these clients? No. You can do some, you can do pieces, you can do mindfulness, exercises, but the DBT program, no, that just doesn't work. They're going to walk away. It's not going to